have a portrait. My name is Dina Wright. I am the Content Area Specialist for Technology Integration for Lyon County School District. And I am joined today by my two lovely colleagues, and I'll let them introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Carrie Bunyard, the Academic Coordinator for the district.
And I am Damon Etter, the PD and Data Manager for Lyon County School District.
And today we are going to talk about student ownership of learning, which is the S domain in our Portrait of a Learner. Before we get started though, I'm going to share a little bit about our district. We're located in northern Nevada, about an hour from Lake Tahoe. Our district consists of about 50,000 people and serves 18 schools that includes 5 smaller, unique, and special communities, which are Fernley, Dayton, Yerington, Silver Springs, and Smith Valley. And Lyon County is actually the 4th largest district in the state. The purpose of this podcast is to create a place for all to witness lifelong learning and to create a community that empowers anyone and everyone with resources that lead to problem solving, creativity, exploring, and finding the joy in learning. Before we dive into that domain S, student ownership of learning, we're going to share a few attitudes of gratitudes that some students in Lyon County School District have written for a special teacher out there. So Damon, can you explain a little bit of what attitude of gratitude is and how students come about nominating a special teacher?
Yeah, I'd love to. So attitude of gratitude started with that philosophy of positive and negative ratios. So when we look at, for every negative comment we give, we need to get 5 positives. And so the idea is always looking for the positive in the things around us. So this is a way for us to give gratitude and recognize the good things that are happening in our district. And our school board reads these attitudes of gratitude, not all of them, but a select one at each of their board members, as a way to highlight that even though we get caught up in maybe in the politics of a school board meeting, that we still can recognize that there are some awesome things happening for our kiddos here in Lyon County School District. So it starts with usually at school sites, they'll have kids recognize a staff member. Again, that could be custodian, bus driver, teacher, just anyone that influences them in the county. And then they just write a quick little blurb of who they're nominating, and then what it is that they're appreciated or what they appreciate of that person. So that's kind of how it works, and it's again done at each school site and then sent up to the school board to be selected and then read at the board meeting. The other positive thing with this too is usually what we did at Dayton Intermediate School is we would take these and then we would give them to the teachers. So then they would get like their mailbox full of attitudes of gratitudes for what students were saying. So it was kind of a little pick-me-up too as well.
Yeah, I remember seeing some posted on the bulletin boards in the hallways too. I like that.
Yeah.
Shout out to Margaret Heim, who is the Administrative Assistant to Superintendent and Board of Trustees. She sent us over a bunch of attitude of gratitudes to choose from to share with you today.
So I'm going to read one from a student at Dayton Intermediate School. And the student said, I am successful at Dayton Intermediate School because of Mrs. Smith. She's the band and choir director there. I want to thank her for believing in me. She helped me with band, let me join marching band even though I just started and could barely play, but she still believed in me. Thank you for always being here for me. She is one of the best people I know. I can sometimes be a handful, but she puts up with me. She is super talented. She is a rock star, modern day hero. Thank you so much for being amazing and always being there for others. I am truly blessed to have you as a teacher.
This one's coming in from Fernley Elementary School. So because of Miss Harry, I want to thank her for helping me with a lot of stuff like math and reading. She's my favorite teacher. She's really nice. I love her so much. So thank you, Miss Harry.
And mine is coming from Yerington Intermediate School because of Miss Barrett. I want to thank her for making school something to look forward to. I also want to thank her for how fun she makes class. The essays she assigns us are the most fun essays I've ever wrote. Thank you for making school something I look forward to. Great job, Miss Barrett. So if you're a student and you want to highlight a special someone, a teacher or a janitor, school secretary.
Don't forget the administrators. They're all seen as the dark side. Talk to your school principal or vice principal and ask for an attitude of gratitude. You can always fill these out at any time. In fact, I know at DIS we used to have them in the office on the wall of mini flyers, so anyone could grab one and fill it out just to show their appreciation.
All right, so let's move on. In a previous episode, we discussed the second domain in our portrait of a learner, which is connected learners, belonging, communication, and collaboration. Today we are going to discuss the S, which is student ownership of learning. The competencies within this domain include empowerment, self-knowledge, and self-direction. So our first question today is what's the best way to structure this learning process? And so how can we really empower our students to own their learning?
So I think one of the ways you structure that learning, Dina, again, this is just me thinking out loud, is to have clear expectations so students know where they're going in their learning. I kind of go back to Silver Stage High School does a lot with success criteria. So they do a lot of outlining, like here's what proficient looks like, here's what advanced looks like, here's what emergent looks like. Because one of the things I think with empowerment, and one of the statements that we have, success statements that we have, is that I can build the skills needed for success and take action to achieve my goals. And I think that's why success criteria is so important, because if you can outline where we're going, what the goal is of our learning, then students can strive to achieve that. So it empowers them to make choices to get there. And the other thing I like with that too is you can then give that student choice as to how to show that proficiency. So if I know this is what proficient looks like, it may be an assessment that shows that, but it could also be a discussion with my teacher that shows that. So again, it empowers the student to find the best way to demonstrate their learning versus everyone has to be regimented and use the same assessment tool. I think is one way. So I really pull a lot of merit into that success criteria as it, again, it empowers our students to be able to act upon their goals and what they want out of their learning.
No, I agree with that, and I think there's lots of different ways that you can to go about that, like starting small, building on previous lessons. For example, having students turn and talk, sharing what was maybe yesterday's lesson, get their minds ready for the new learning that's happening today, and make that connection to provide those structures.
I was going to say another thing that teachers can do as well is model for their students how to advocate for their learning needs. And so sometimes that's what is the teacher's goal in that learning. So I think even though we're teaching students to do something, like I think there's also a goal that the teacher's wanting to achieve. And so I think they can model like what their goal is with the learning with their class. So here's what I'm hoping to achieve from this learning. What are you hoping to achieve? And so again, modeling is always a key piece to empower, is showing what that looks like so students can also act upon it.
And knowing your learners, like some may need more modeling or providing different scaffolds, and then are they going to be ready to take that next step with their learning? Are they ready to go try it on their own? Or are they going to still need to, have a little bit more support with the teacher before they get started?
Mm-hmm. And I do think that's really important, that explicit modeling.
And sometimes I think we forget that part also, because we just will say you need to go do this, and off you go, and then there could be things that don't work out like maybe you had intended or planned without that explicit modeling.
Okay, so Damon, you mentioned something about choice. So let's talk a little bit about personal investment or engagement and buy-in. We all know what a difference something can make when we do have choice. So how can we make that culture shift as teachers where we are more of a coach or a facilitator of learning?
That's a really good question. So I think part of it is instead of always coming up, so again, I think of traditional teaching, right, where we teach something and then we give an assessment at the end, a quiz, a unit assessment, or something like that. And I think where you can bring in choice is giving students the option to choose how they demonstrate or perform their learning. Hopefully this is where you want me to go with it, with your question. But so for example, if I'm wanting to assess a unit I just taught on, whatever that is, giving students the option to demonstrate that either maybe through writing or through a YouTube video, a video presentation with Adobe Spark, or through a one-on-one conversation with the teacher, where again, it's giving the student the empowerment to, this is what I'm looking for, how you show it to me, I'm going to give to you. And that way a student has the choice to find what engages them in their learning. So if you've got that artistic student who wants to draw it, let's do it. But again, you've still got to show the components of what the teacher's looking for to show mastery of that learning. So again, I think it's giving that choice to students empowers them to then find their talents and their strengths and then utilize those to demonstrate their learning. rather than I'm going to have to sit and read or do a quiz or something that I know I'm not really good at quizzes. So we start to deflate and unempower, if that's a word, a student from showing their learning because they know they don't do well on tests. And so the anxiety creeps in, and then that causes that disruption of learning. So again, that when you're talking about teacher facilitator roles, it's the teacher giving up control of how that assessment looks and giving that choice to the students to show their learning.
And going back to that modeling, again, building that capacity so then when they get to that point, they can do that successfully.
Yes, well, it's that success criteria. You've got to define what you're looking for and at what level. And again, you've got to challenge your students. So your students who are proficient could show an advanced level. And so being able to outline what success looks like at all levels then empowers the student to find that. So if you're, again, like you said, kind of building capacity with these different ways of showing learning is important. So it's not just saying, okay, kids, here you go, like go show however you want to do that. It's building that capacity around different tools to do that. And you can do that through practice and doing some simple tasks that allow them to engage in those different tools to then hopefully one day remove yourself as the facilitator and let the kid facilitate that learning.
Yes, and I think they'll be more invested in their learning. They're going to come up with something that maybe you hadn't intended.
I also think a big piece with this is that reflection, which leads us to that next key point. So what happens when students have that well-developed metacognition, the ability to really stop and think about what they've learned, where they're at, and where they're going?
Well, I think you're looking at that competency within there of self-knowledge, right? And one of the things I think about when you're creating that transfer of knowledge from working memory into long-term storage is you've got to make it stick to them, like to what their experience is. And so I think, like, again, I'm going to use that example of an art student, like, and that's one thing I loved when I was teaching was I loved the creativity that came from my art students and what they showed, because I could see the learning that they had acquired, but it was in a different medium than just giving them a pop quiz or a ABC multiple choice option. And so one of the things I think that's important is demonstrating their knowledge and mastery of skills in a way that best fits their learning style. So allowing them to identify how they learn and then giving them the ability to show that learning in the style that fits them best. And so that's a way of self-knowledge. Is for one, a kid needs to know what their learning style is and what their strengths are in order to do that. So again, it kind of goes back to empowering. You got to give them the opportunity, empower them with the opportunity to do that, but then also coach them and support them in finding what works best for them to show their knowledge, which is sometimes they're not aware of. Mm-hmm. Especially if, I come from a secondary mind, but like sometimes they don't even know what their learning style is. And so by giving them that self-knowledge, it then also empowers them to be able to show their learning in the way they want.
I think once they've been introduced to those platforms and different, learning styles or, different things that you just mentioned, they're able to run with it. It's their creativity comes out.
And I like that you say opportunities, because it really is up to us as teachers to support that self-direction, right? And bring a range of classroom and school resources into instruction.
I think we also need to, it's that comment, I think we also need to remember too that it's not always academics that we're supporting our students in, that anxiety and stress are real things. Like, we've gained strategies over the years of how we deal with that. So in your cases, I know you're both runners. You'll go for a run. For me, I'll sit and binge watch something and eat, Cheetos for a day or something.
Well, I've done that too.
So, I mean, there's healthy ways to deal with stress and anxiety, and I think that's one thing to remember too when we're giving our students self-knowledge. It's also self-knowledge of how to control those emotions. And again, we can model that for them as teachers when we're stressed and having anxiety, just being honest and saying, I am super stressed out today, and so I'm just going to take some deep breaths right now and relax for a second before we continue. And again, it's not a bad thing. It's showing that you have self-control. It's showing that you're aware of what you're feeling and then how you're going to address it. So again, I think there's different ways to do that, but again, I think it's an important piece to remember that our students are also not just academic focused, but again, how are they dealing with that stress and anxiety?
And maybe some of having those choices will help alleviate some of that stress and anxiety.
Good point.
you're
Love it.
explicitly teaching what it might look like, sound like, and feel like as you're going through this learning process. All right, listeners, so as we were recording, we had a couple of surprise guests walk through the conference room and actually joined in on our conversation. We didn't get a chance to introduce these lovely educational service department team members, but Jim Gianotti and Sandra Garner actually chimed in on the conversation.
We have a couple guests in the audience today.
Own it. Own it. Own the learning. I guess I sit back and think ownership of learning, and I'm looking at it maybe from a solely secondary standpoint, right? But that relevance and understanding the connectedness between what we learn in math, what we learn in English, and then maybe careers, right? So how does all that work that we do in math? I take ownership of that when I go to a CTE course and I make that connection, but I own it. I start to understand how that's relevant to real world learning, practical application. I don't know, and maybe I'm kind of missing the mark a bit. I don't know. Honestly, I think about these kids that are doing work-based learning and they're taking those skills that they learn. I just got a text from Dwayne Mattice today. He took pictures of a kid who learned welding through an ag mech, at least I believe through ag mech, but he's already started his own business. He's not even fully grown. He's got a truck. He goes around with a mobile welder. He does welding jobs for people just on the side. But he's made that connection. He's taken ownership of what he's learned, and he's applied that to real life. And I think we often miss the mark because when we ask kids to take ownership of their learning, and we give 35 practice problems on a math concept, what's to own there, right? I mean, and so when we think about the portrait and we think about all of these things coming together, they live interconnectedly, right? So they take that ownership of learning and it's lifelong learning. Okay, how do I do this in problem-based or project-based situations where I learn the math, but I learn its relevance and I learn how I can apply it, and then I take ownership of that. Whereas if I learn it in isolation, it's really hard to make that connection. I just feel like maybe this domain is tough because it does connect to everything in so many ways that it's hard to kind of focus on in isolation. But I think we can't own it until we understand how it relates to what we do in life, right? It's hard. I guess I think about, why does a kid own that learning that they do in science and go into the medical field? It's relevant, right? And it's interesting and they're passionate and they kind of, right? They'll own that learning because that's meaningful to them. If we don't make it meaningful to kids, they're never going to own that, right? Why learn to read? But it's just a bunch of words and it's, you're making me read books that I could give a rip about, right? I'm not interested in that story. I mean, we hear this all the time with kids in high school with Shakespeare. It's hard to understand because they use so many different, they use words that are not in the common vernacular these days, and so they have to understand what it is they're reading before they can even understand the story, right? But the storyline applies to real life, and any English teacher will tell you, holy smokes, there's so many life lessons in Shakespeare that we could benefit from, but it's getting through the language. It would be like an EL student coming into a classroom and not understanding the science vocabulary. How do you own that when you don't understand it? How do you own math when I'm just going through the motions and doing 50 problems of slope-intercept form? Why? How do you expect me to own that? So I'm just supposed to know it because it's a required class? Give it to me in terms I understand. Show me practical applications. It's, and the why behind it. If I understand the why, I'm more likely to own it. But if I learn it in isolation and I never apply it anywhere, I'm never going to own that learning. It's not relevant to me. And I think that ownership has to be made relevant, meaningful for a kid before they'll own it. And that's where
teaches consequences.
Right.
Ownership teaches consequences when they have to own and they decide, you know what, I may know this or whatever, but I'm going to bomb a test because I don't feel like doing it or whatever, you know, or I don't want to take all this information in, and their grades reflect. They learn the consequences too. So
They might own that too. I mean, I've talked to kids before with standardized testing. I don't care about it. I'll own that. I'll own that it's not relevant or meaningful to me because I'm going to go do this with my life. The ACT has no relevance. So how do we make that relevant to kids? How do we make that meaningful to our students so that they will own that learning and show what they have learned so that we can get a measure of it? You know, Damon and I have talked before, testing's not going away. It's there, right? We could say that, you know, it's inconsequential, whatever, but it's still there. So how do we make it meaningful? How do we make it relevant so that we can at least measure that learning? And that's why people don't tend to scoff at like map tests, because it is hoped, it's believed that the teacher will then take that map data and go, okay, I can identify where Jimmy and Sally's deficiencies are. I can fill those gaps by doing this, this, and this. And here I can extend this by moving in this direction. I know where my kids are at. And now I can make the learning more meaningful and relevant, and I can expose them to grade level content so that they can progress.
And it goes back to that brain research.
Yeah.
Making sense and meaning. And if you want something to stick in long-term memory, you have to be pulling from that.
You have to be able to retrieve
Right.
previous memories to connect it with, because that's how it gets stored. If you don't connect it with anything, then it'll fall out.
Right. It's that relevancy. No.
Relevance.
Relevance.
Relevancy. Yep. Well, and you think about kids as they're learning in the first 5 years of life, right? Before they even get to school. I own it when I touch that hot burner and find out, oh, I shouldn't touch that because it's hot. It's a consequence. Yep. Goes back to the consequences, but it's real life. It's meaningful.
Well, I was going to add, like, that's another piece too, is so you talk about consequences, and I always think the brain always responds immediately to survival first. So it's hot, I need to survive, I'm not touching it again. The next part it goes to is emotional. So how do I feel about the learning I'm engaging in? So if I know, if reading's been a struggle my whole life, what ownership am I going to take? Am I going to continue to make myself feel bad because I can't do this? Or am I going to find something else to engage in? So they own their learning by finding something that is more meaningful to them. And then once you get past emotion, then you can get into learning. But you have to get through those survival first, then emotion, and then get into the actual learning. And that's where I think it goes back to that ownership piece. Like, again, you've got to make it, like you were talking about, relevant to their life. Because if it's not, then there's no, I mean, and they've got to find that they can be successful in it. Like, again, if we're giving a kid, like your example, 50 math problems, and I'm not good at math, all we're doing is creating an emotional response of I'm horrible at this, which then creates a self-concept of yourself of I'm not good, I'm not a good student. So then what are we going to get in the end, right? So it's again those adult actions where we can create a situation where we're giving them success. Maybe it's connecting it to something they are interested in. So
skateboarding.
If it's skateboarding and
slope intercepts, skateboarding, I don't know.
Then it's creating an end to where it's not about I'm a bad math student, but how can this apply to improve my baseball game or my skateboarding game or whatever it is, you know? And I always did that too. I remember thinking of a student who struggled and didn't engage in anything because just there's a lot to that story, but I remember like I gave him an opportunity to, all right, you got to do this research paper. What are you into? And because they gave me something that interested them, and I can tell you like that student because of that actually started engaging into looking at Nevada state law and reading Nevada state law. Talk about difficult text sometimes, but like. And trying to figure out how do I make what I want to do work with the law, which again I think if I just said read this law but again they owned it because it was something they wanted. So we got over the emotion of writing is something I can't do to I want to do this with my life. How do I get there? And again I was shocked. They read Nevada state law and we were able to tell me what they read. So that, to me, that was a win. And giving kids the ability to own and that choice is so powerful. So.
Well, and it makes teaching and learning much more fun when you could do that, right? It's not related to a test. It's not related to something that I don't know is not meaningful. I mean, when you see that light go on with the kid, that's the fun. That's what we got into education for, right? To spark that creativity, that curiosity, to get them interested in learning, and that's where that teachable moment. I remember constantly, a teachable moment, live for that and capitalize on it, right? That's where I feel like all this standardized testing and everything has pushed us away from that, because we're like, no, we gotta teach the test. We gotta make sure we all pass.
I'm not giving up on the kiddos either, because I think they're all gonna start owning at their own pace and time. And I'm talking about my son. He ADHD, like he had so many things, medical, whatever, and he didn't want to read, and he did, but his teachers kept saying, you know what, when you're ready, you'll get there. When or for third grade, please just do, whatever you need to do to find an interest. They kept using that word. Find an interest, Bo, find an interest. When his interest finally hit him? In college. Biochem. He carries his books around with him still. He rereads his college books because now he finally found it. But you're giving up on our kiddos and saying, well, you're not going to own it, then you're not going to learn it. You hear that, right? So just kind of keep encouraging them to own it. And eventually they'll come.
And I was going to go, one of the conversations we're having right now is this whole idea of Carnegie units versus competency-based learning. And is it about like earning the credit and meeting like the standard, or is it about like the competency of like when you achieve it at your time? And I think, again, it's that factory model that there's many videos on that of schools, this factory model of like, well, by this age you should be doing this, and by this age you should be doing this. But again, we don't always all function that way. And so that's one thing I like with Lyon County and Portrait is we're really trying to look at how do we remove this timestamp system to make sure, the born on date, to make sure we're meeting the needs of our kiddos. It's not about this graduate. I mean, graduate, obviously that's a measurement that we have to uphold to, but at the same time, it's recognizing that just because you're not getting it yet now doesn't mean you won't get it, and not putting our kids down because they're not there yet. I love that they were encouraging, find your spark or find your interest. Like that was a mantra. And that's the encouragement kids need, is not, well, why aren't you doing this? Why are you failing? It's just, well, let's find your interest. Let's do this. And then it creates that encouragement and encourages ownership. I know that you mentioned compliance, and that was one thing I don't know why this was a statement that just struck me. I was having a conversation with a group of educators, and somebody brought up that our students are in compliance-based behavior versus learning. And so, like, again, what paperwork do I need to fill out? Sorry, I just had Roz from like Monsters Inc. go in my head. You didn't do your paperwork. Sorry, but it goes back to that whole thing of, and when we get behaviors and even back to the emotional anxiety depression piece, like it's because it's compliance-based behavior. I can't meet the compliance because I'm confined to these expectations, and there's no way for me to get out of that box, I guess. And so
and our students act up.
Yeah, and so you get the behaviors.
Or if you're, if your kids like you, they will have ritualistic compliance within the classroom. They know they're supposed to behave this way. I think it was Marzano that talked about that, right? Ritualistic compliance. You walk into a classroom and see kids going through the motions, but once they leave the classroom, it's out. They just.
It's not true engagement.
It's not true engagement, and it's not that love of learning. It's not the. They're not taking ownership of it because it's not meaningful.
Yeah, I remember someone saying, at the end of the day, you shouldn't be exhausted. The kids should be, right? They should be the ones sweating.
You're doing all the work.
Yeah. And those who do the most talking do the most learning.
Yep.
I've heard that one too.
All right, thank you everyone for all of your input and all that you had to share today. Does anybody have any highlights or celebrations that they would like to share?
Is it grant?
Yeah.
I don't think
I have-
it's grants in the general budget, so it's
There's
funding
always
now.
lots
Like I
to
said, we don't know
celebrate
what the
with
state is
CTE
as far as
at high school.
it is funded
I mean, I just received video from WNC of the EMT program. Shout out to the program up there at Fernley High School. They participated in a simulation at WNC where they had to respond to a victim, pick the victim, I should say pick it up, but I don't know.
Transport?
Transport, thank you. They had to transport the victim to the ER, and then the nursing students took over from there. So kudos to
Very cool.
Heather
our
Kuntz, right?
Yeah, Heather
Is that right?
Kuntz at Fernley High School.
Way to go, Heather!
Yeah, good job. Of course, we've got lots of kids finishing up their CTE certificates. We've heard some great things out of Shane's class at Fernley High School with the welding. A lot of students got their AWS certifications, which are industry recognized credentials that they can walk into a job site with. So kudos to Shane. We had 2 programs of distinction this year, the CNA program both at Yarrington High and Fernley High, as well as John Grace's construction program at Fernley High School. So great news there. I mean, we've had a lot of really cool things going on with work-based learning. Nicole Taylor, Talia Hinkie working with our work-based learning kids and CTE programs. We've had lots of different things going on there. We had Dayton Elementary School with the
Purple
veteran. Pardon?
They were Purple Heart School?
Yeah, Purple Heart School. So kudos to Dayton Elementary getting that done, and they had tons of guest speakers talking about careers during the process of that, which is really cool. So that's some good work-based learning stuff that our kids can, talk about ownership and making goals and setting up plans for their future as they go through school. That's exciting. Things that they want to participate in. We've had kids compete in Skills USA recently for CTE programs, and we've got a lot to celebrate. High school CTE and work-based learning. There's a lot of really cool things going on there. Not to take away from anybody else, because lots of other folks are doing great stuff too. But I'll always brag about our career and tech programs and what they're doing to get kids ready for either college or career.
Yeah.
Depends on which path they choose. So anyway,
That's awesome.
some kudos there.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us today.
Always a great discussion. I appreciate all of you guys.
Don't forget to subscribe and check out any resources that are in the comments, and keep up the hard work.
Stay strong and keep teaching.